At 87 years old, Jane Fonda stands before the world as a symbol of strength, an icon whose name evokes glamour, activism, and reinvention. But behind the applause, behind the decades of stardom, lies a story most people never truly understood. A story marked by loss, by abandonment, by a lifelong battle to feel worthy of love. A story that began long before she ever stepped into a spotlight. For countless fans around the world, Jane Fonda has always seemed unstoppable, the actress who conquered Hollywood, the activist who challenged governments, the woman who rebuilt herself again and again. Yet the truth is more fragile, more devastating. Beneath her public triumphs lived a woman quietly carrying emotional wounds that time never fully healed. This is the heartbreaking journey of a girl born into fame but raised in shadows, a daughter who spent her childhood trying to earn the affection of a father who could barely look her in the eye, a young woman whose life fractured forever when tragedy struck her family in a way no one could have prepared for, and an actress who, despite all her accolades, spent decades believing she wasn't enough. Jane Fonda's life is not simply a story of success. It is a story of survival, of resilience, of breaking, rebuilding, and breaking again. It is the story of how a woman who shaped generations never stopped searching for the love she lost as a child, and how even now her past echoes through every chapter of her life. Tonight, we step into the truth behind the legend, the pain behind the smile, the journey behind the icon. This is the heartbreaking life of Jane Fonda.
Origins and family roots. Jane Seymour Fonda was born into a world of bright lights and deep shadows. Her father, Henry Fonda, was already one of Hollywood's most respected actors, a man known for portraying quiet heroes with honest hearts. But at home, Henry was nothing like the characters audiences adored. He was distant, withdrawn, emotionally unreachable. And his silence shaped Jane's earliest understanding of love. She spent her childhood trying to interpret his frowns, trying to decode his rare moments of praise, trying, desperately, just to be seen. Her mother, Frances Ford Seymour, came from a wealthy and distinguished family, but behind the elegance lived a woman tormented by depression and emotional instability. Jane would grow up sensing her mother's fragility, watching her slip slowly into a darkness neither she nor her father could stop. The Fonda household was a place of quiet expectations, unspoken rules, and emotional restraint. Nothing messy, nothing loud, nothing real was allowed to surface. Jane and her brother Peter learned early that survival meant performing, not on a screen, but within their own home. They became the children who didn't complain, the children who didn't cry, the children who tried to make things easier for everyone but themselves. And as Jane grew older, she began to understand that her family legacy was made of more than fame. It was built on silence, sorrow, and secrets. This was the world Jane Fonda was born into, one where the glamour of Hollywood sat like a fragile mask over wounds the world never saw. The roots of her future triumphs and heartbreaks were already being formed in those early years, in a family drowning quietly beneath the weight of its own pain.
Childhood struggles and early influences. Jane's childhood was marked by a kind of loneliness that no child should ever experience. While the world imagined the Fondas as Hollywood royalty, inside their home, emotional distance was the norm. Jane, still just a young girl, lived in a constant state of trying to win her father's approval, trying to comfort her fragile mother, trying to hold together a family that felt like it was falling apart. But the moment that shattered her childhood forever came when she was only 12 years old. Her mother, overwhelmed by years of mental health struggles, took her own life while institutionalized. The news wasn't told to Jane with compassion. Her father, stoic and emotionally locked away, simply informed her that her mother had died of a heart attack. Jane didn't learn the truth until she read it years later in a magazine. That discovery became one of the deepest emotional wounds of her life. After her mother's death, her world grew colder. Her father, unable to cope with grief, became even more distant. Jane internalized everything, that she wasn't good enough, that her mother had left because she wasn't lovable, that her father's silence was somehow her fault. These thoughts followed her like shadows into adulthood. Yet in the midst of this pain, something else began to grow inside her, a fierce will, a determination, a desire not to disappear the way her mother had. She turned to dance, movement, expression. It was the first time she felt control, the first time her body could say what her voice couldn't. It became her refuge, her escape. But life hadn't finished testing her. Teachers labeled her too tall to be a serious dancer. Classmates teased her for being awkward. And still, Jane pushed forward. Her struggles didn't break her. They built her. Every heartbreak carved out a deeper emotional well she would one day draw from as one of the greatest actresses in Hollywood history.
First steps into career. Jane Fonda never planned to become an actress. In fact, she spent years running from the shadow of her father's reputation. Henry Fonda was a legend, stoic, iconic, untouchable. And Jane believed that stepping into his world meant living forever in comparisons she could never win. But life had other plans. In her late teens, Jane drifted through schools, unsure of who she was or what she wanted. She struggled with self-worth, often seeing herself through the harsh, critical lens her father had unknowingly fixed onto her. It wasn't until she met Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio in New York that something finally shifted. Strasberg didn't just teach her acting, he saw her, really saw her. He recognized the pain buried behind her guarded expressions and told her it could be her greatest artistic weapon. For the first time, Jane felt that her emotional intensity, her lifelong feeling of not being enough, could be transformed into power. Under Strasberg's guidance, she learned to tap into her childhood wounds, her grief, her longing. Acting wasn't just a craft for her. It was therapy, catharsis, and liberation all at once. The stage became the one place where she no longer had to pretend everything was fine. Her early roles on Broadway drew attention. Her presence was electric, raw, honest, aching. Hollywood soon came calling, offering her opportunities she never imagined. And though she stepped onto film sets with fear and doubt gnawing at her, she also felt something new forming inside her: purpose. These early years were not glamorous. They were filled with self-criticism, anxiety, and relentless pressure. Yet Jane walked through them, step by painful step, reclaiming pieces of herself she had lost long ago. She wasn't trying to become a star. She was trying to survive.
And along the way, she discovered she was born to tell stories the world needed to hear.
Breakthrough moment. Jane Fonda's breakthrough didn't arrive with loud fanfare. It arrived slowly, quietly, like a storm building on the horizon. After a series of promising early films, she took on a role that would change everything. In 1969, she starred in They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, a bleak, emotionally devastating story about broken people trapped in a grueling dance marathon during the Great Depression. The film demanded something dark, vulnerable, and brutally honest from her, something most actors would shy away from. But Jane stepped into the role as if she'd been preparing for it her entire life. Every scene drew from the reservoir of heartbreak inside her, the loss of her mother, the lifelong hunger for her father's approval, the years of silent suffering. Critics were stunned. Audiences were shaken. Hollywood, for the first time, looked at Jane Fonda not as the daughter of Henry Fonda, but as a force of her own. Then came 1971's Klute, the role of Bree Daniels, a call girl with layers of strength, pain, and vulnerability, was unlike anything Hollywood had offered a woman at the time. Jane approached the character with fearless intensity, researching, interviewing, studying, becoming. She disappeared into the role, giving one of the most haunting performances cinema had ever seen. Klute earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress. But behind the celebration, she felt something more profound. She had broken free. She wasn't just an actress, she was an artist with a voice powerful enough to shake an industry. Yet acclaim didn't heal her. Success didn't silence her inner critic. If anything, fame amplified the pressure she placed on herself. The world now expected greatness from Jane Fonda, and she pushed herself mercilessly to deliver it. This was her breakthrough, yes, but it was also the beginning of a journey toward a future filled with political controversy, personal upheaval, and emotional turmoil that would test her more deeply than any script ever could.
Peak career and golden era. The 1970s and 1980s were the years when Jane Fonda's brilliance erupted onto the world stage with unstoppable force. After her Oscar-winning performance in Klute, she entered a period of artistic dominance few actors ever achieve. Every role she touched seemed to turn to gold, not because of glamour, but because of the emotional honesty she brought to each character. Jane didn't act, she revealed. Movies like Julia, Coming Home, and The China Syndrome cemented her reputation as one of the most daring actresses of her generation. In Coming Home, she portrayed a woman transformed by love, guilt, and awakening awareness during the Vietnam War. The role earned her a second Academy Award and deepened her identity as both an artist and an activist. It was during this era that Jane became nearly unstoppable, a woman who challenged Hollywood's limitations on women and fought fiercely for the stories she believed mattered. But her golden era wasn't confined to the screen. In the 1980s, Jane reinvented herself once again with something no one expected: the home workout movement. With her Jane Fonda workout videos, she sparked a cultural revolution, turning fitness into empowerment for millions of women around the world. By the decade's end, she wasn't just a movie star, she was a global icon. And yet, behind the success, there was a weight she carried quietly. Fame had not healed her childhood scars. Awards did not mend broken relationships. Activism, while fulfilling, came with backlash, public judgment, and relentless scrutiny. Her name was everywhere, her face on every screen, but the loneliness that had followed her since childhood still lingered. Still, Jane pushed forward. She worked, fought, created, transformed. Her golden era shone brilliantly, perhaps because she had built it herself, piece by fragile piece, out of pain, perseverance, and a desire to make the world better than the one she grew up in.
Personal life and hidden pain. If Jane Fonda's career soared like a comet, her personal life was a battlefield of heartbreak, longing, and silent wounds she tried desperately to hide. Beneath the glamour, beneath the political fire, beneath the strength she projected, there was a woman who had been shaped by abandonment and self-doubt since childhood. Jane's romantic relationships, especially her marriages, often reflected her need to become what others wanted her to be. With each partner, she transformed, reshaping her personality, her beliefs, even her behavior to fit the version of herself she thought would finally earn love. She became the political wife, the high society wife, the revolutionary wife. But in doing so, she often lost sight of who she truly was. Her first marriage to Roger Vadim exposed her to a world of glamour and excess that left her feeling objectified, always questioning her value. Her second marriage to activist Tom Hayden pushed her into the heart of political firestorms. She found purpose in activism, but also guilt, fear, and overwhelming responsibility. Her third marriage to Ted Turner brought material comfort and stability, yet left her emotionally starved, another man she tried to mold herself around, losing pieces of her identity along the way. Through it all, Jane battled internal demons, eating disorders, insecurity, and a lifetime of trying to earn her father's love. Even as she gave iconic performances, raised children, and fought for justice, she often cried alone, asking herself why she always felt inadequate, why the world admired her when she could barely stand to look in the mirror. Her father, Henry Fonda, remained a distant, complicated figure in her life. They shared the screen in On Golden Pond, a film that forced them both to confront decades of emotional distance. When he died shortly after, it shattered her. She felt she had finally reached him, only to lose him forever. Jane Fonda's hidden pain was not a footnote to her story. It was the fire that shaped her, broke her, and ultimately pushed her to search for healing. Turning point. Decline. By the late 1990s, Jane Fonda's life had reached a quiet but painful crossroads. On the outside, she seemed to have everything: fame, wealth, and decades of iconic work behind her. But inside, she felt hollow, drained, and exhausted from decades of trying to be everything for everyone except herself. Her marriage to media mogul Ted Turner, once seen as a powerful union, had slowly begun to suffocate her spirit. Ted loved her, but he also expected her to exist within the world he created. She tried, as she had always had, to mold herself into the person he wanted: supportive, adaptable, endlessly accommodating. Yet with every compromise, she lost another piece of herself. Her career also slowed. Projects felt less meaningful, roles became fewer, and the fire that once drove her began to dim. For the first time in her life, Jane stepped away from acting entirely. The woman who once commanded Hollywood walked away from the spotlight, retreating into a life where she no longer recognized herself. This period wasn't dramatic in a public sense. There were no scandals, no headlines shouting her downfall. The decline was internal, emotional, a quiet unraveling after years of being stretched thin by fame, activism, motherhood, and relationships defined by sacrifice. Then came a moment, a small one, but life-changing. Jane realized she was nearing 60, and she didn't know who she truly was. She had lived her entire life as a reflection of others' expectations, her father's daughter, her husband's partner, Hollywood's star, the world's political symbol. But who was Jane Fonda when all the lights dimmed down? This painful question led her into therapy, deep self-reflection, and a spiritual awakening. She began peeling away decades of guilt, trauma, and silence. She confronted the eating disorders that had shadowed her since youth. She examined her relationships. She said the thing she had never dared to say before. I want my life back. It wasn't a fall. It was a breaking. And from that breaking, a new Jane Fonda began to emerge.
Legacy and meaning. Today, Jane Fonda stands as one of the most influential figures in American culture, not because of fame alone, but because of resilience. Her legacy is not defined only by her films, though they shaped generations. It isn't defined solely by her activism, though her voice helped shift political landscapes. Jane's true legacy lies in her transformation, her willingness to confront pain head-on and use it to build something meaningful. In Hollywood, she remains a towering figure, an actress who broke the mold again and again. Her performances, from Klute to Coming Home to On Golden Pond, are still studied, still revered, still unmatched in emotional depth. She opened doors for women, demanding complex roles and refusing to accept Hollywood's limitations. But beyond the screen, her activism changed lives. She stood against war, environmental destruction, economic injustice, and gender inequality. She made mistakes, bold, controversial ones, but she never hid from them. Instead, she owned them, learned from them, and continued forward with even more determination. In the later years of her life, she became a symbol of reinvention. At an age when many retreat into silence, Jane went back to acting, starring in hit series like Grace and Frankie, inspiring a new generation. She launched Fire Drill Fridays, protesting climate change well into her 80s. She used her platform not for vanity, but for urgency, pushing society to imagine a better world. Her legacy is multifaceted, complicated, and undeniably powerful. She is proof that a person can live many lives, make many mistakes, and still become someone extraordinary. She showed the world that aging is not a decline. It is an evolution, a deepening, a second chance. Jane Fonda's meaning extends far beyond Hollywood. She represents the courage to grow, to confront the shadows of the past, and to keep fighting, even when the world tells you to sit down. Her life asks us one question: what could we become if we stopped being afraid of ourselves?
Part 10. Closing Reflection. In the final reflection of Jane Fonda's extraordinary life, one truth rises above all the others. She was never defined by the roles she played, the protests she led, or the awards she won. She was defined by the courage it took to confront herself,
to face the wounds carved into her soul long before the world ever knew her name. Jane's story is not just a Hollywood biography, it is a map of survival. A woman shaped by loss, driven by longing, transformed by reinvention. She spent her early life trying to prove she was enough, her middle years trying to fix a broken world, and her later years discovering the quiet, radical truth that she was worthy of love simply because she existed. Her journey reminds us that even those who seem unbreakable carry invisible cracks. Even icons fall to their knees in the dark. Even legends cry when no one is watching. Jane Fonda showed us that the most heroic battles aren't fought on screens or public stages. They are waged inside the human heart. As she entered her 80s, fiercely marching for climate justice, filming new projects, and speaking openly about her past, she became something rare, a symbol of unapologetic evolution. A woman who refused to let age silence her. A woman who refused to let mistakes define her. A woman who refused to stop growing. And that is the bittersweet beauty of her story. Jane Fonda taught us that healing isn't a destination, it is a lifelong journey. That identity isn't something we inherit, it is something we build piece by fragile piece. That purpose doesn't fade with age, it deepens. Her life leaves us with one lingering, haunting reflection. It is never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Jane Fonda's story is a reminder that beneath every triumph there is pain. Beneath every spotlight, a shadow. Beneath every legend, a human being, aching, striving, enduring, rising. And perhaps that is her greatest legacy. Not her awards, or her fame, or her activism, but her refusal to surrender her spirit. In the end, Jane Fonda leaves us with one final message to all of us. Don't be afraid to start over. Don't be afraid to change. Don't be afraid to fight for your own heart. A legend, yes, but more importantly, a survivor who never stopped searching for herself.